Welcome to episode 470 of Cinematary. I'm your host, Zach Dennis, and I am here with
Grace Winburn,
Michael O'Malley.
And in today's episode, we're going to be talking about movies that we saw this week in part one, including Dune part two, which is confusing. Not the movie, just the part one, part two. And then part two, we're going to be wrapping up our Betty and Joan series, Joan and Betty, however you want to go about it, with 1962's Whatever Happened to Baby Jane.
Banger movie.
Which for our YouTube folks, Grace is dressed up as for the podcast.
I'm Baby Jane. I'm exactly what happened.
This is what happened to Baby Jane. She got on a podcast.
She joined a podcast so that she could talk all about herself.
Seriously, if this movie happened today, Baby Jane would have a podcast.
Yeah, they would. The Hudsons would have like a podcast, and
they would talk about like their co-stars and all the drama and the making of the movie.
And then the podcast would have an abrupt end because they had a falling out involving, being run over by a car.
But then before the falling out, it'd be like, well, Blanche is really pissing me off. But before we get to that, Blue Apron, are you tired of having to cook? All right, well, let's jump into movies that we saw this week because I feel like we got a pretty robust list. And let's kick it off with the movie of the moment, and that is Dune Part 2. I rewatched the first Dune before going to see this. I hadn't watched it since it was in theaters. I don't think I was as high on it as most. And to be honest, I rewatched it before this movie, and I fell asleep during it because that movie is insanely boring. There's a lot.
I've never heard that.
There's a lot of talking. They're just talking about like these like galactic politics that I don't care about. There's these bald people going into oil, and then there's action by the end. But overall, overall, I'm going to be honest. It's all preamble for this movie. Like this movie's where the stuff starts happening. That movie is just a lot of, and there's like Timothée Chalamet. I don't think is very good in that one. He just kind of mumbles stuff, and like Zendaya, anytime she shows up, it looks like she's in like a perfume ad because it's always like her like walking away and like turning, looking over her shoulder in the desert. It looks like a commercial. Anyway,
I saw someone online say that Zendaya was miscast for this movie because she has a face that looks like it's never seen a world without a cell phone.
I can buy that.
Yeah.
I'll be honest. We'll get into it in the part two. I don't think she's good in either movie, but that's that. I don't think she's been good in a movie, I'll be honest, but that's a whole other thing.
Dang.
Anyway, so Dune part one, whatever. Dune part two, much more going on. So this one, we got Paul Atreides, which I still cannot get over the fact that this Messiah is named Paul, like some white boy named Paul. Anyway,
now I gotta say I love the names in Dune. Duncan, Idaho.
They're fantastic. You just have Paul, and then you have like
Jessica. Paul's name is Jessica, or Paul's mom's name is Jessica.
Yeah, Josh Brolin's character's Gurney Halleck. Like it's awesome. It's very like I love that part. But Paul, good old Paul, he's now with the Fremen, who are the indigenous people to the desert planet of Arrakis, where he and his family had taken over, but then were brutally murdered in the first movie. Spoiler alert. And he's been taken in by the Fremen. He's seeking a path of revenge against the family of the Harkonnens who destroyed his family lineage and home and all that kind of stuff. But at the same time, he's like possibly the Messiah ? And gonna bring the Fremen to give Arrakis back to the Fremen or whatever the hell is going on. There's a lot of prophecies in play here that I find to be tedious a little at times, but then that's just my own prerogative. Overall, though, I don't know. I like Denis Villeneuve. I think he knows how to competently make movies. I don't find his movies interesting. I think they're really pretty and they're great to look at, but I don't ever find much substance here. And and I say that's how I feel about most of them. But with this one specifically, there is like the really interesting like religious section of this slash because the political stuff doesn't really, I don't care about the different planets and the families and stuff like that. But like the whole religious angle of it is kind of fascinating. This whole like Messiah complex thing going on. But I feel like whenever it's relied on to kind of like dig into, he he's never able to like give it room to breathe, like narratively and like through dialogue. Like the images are great. Oh, sorry.
I was gonna say I think I like this movie more than you, but I do agree. I think he's too literal of a filmmaker. Like I don't know, like the book, which I haven't read since high school, but I have memories of the book that are like, this book is like trippy as hell. And that like ties into the like religious stuff because like Paul has like a religious awakening after basically taking a psychedelic and like things like that. And I think this movie really struggles to dramatize that at times.
Yeah, because the first movie, the one thing I really liked about the first movie is that it gets real trippy. It gets like super psychedelic and like it has moments of like where it's really kind of going in this like mystical area, but in this one he like drops that. Like you really don't have like any as much mysticism. It's a lot of Rebecca Ferguson's character talking to herself because she's talking to her baby, and that's like, and then you have like
who's Anya Taylor-Joy.
Yeah, who's Anya Taylor-Joy. And you have like this baby, and you have like a lot of mysticism towards the end. But like in terms, like just cinematically, like you know, you have scenes in the first one where like Paul's just like tripping, and you're getting like these really like visually sumptuous sequences that I'm just kind of like, yeah, this is cool. I'm not getting much out of it, but like at least it's like fun to be like to watch. And in this one, it kind of drops all that. Like everything in this, like you said, is very literal. And I'm like, I feel like it needs to be less literal and more vibey. There's not a lot of vibes in this movie. It's very just like matter of fact. This is what we're telling you.
Yeah, I don't know. I like this movie. I think it's interesting how the religious stuff and the politics converge because, you know, the religious stuff is like basically the like millennia long project of like a colonialist religion to like seed like a messiah narrative into this indigenous people, and that's going to allow them to be controlled by this religious group long term. And I think that all that's really interesting. I do think that like there are a few key sequences in this movie that feel like that they didn't quite know how to do them in a way that made them interesting, and like it all converges on that like mystical stuff, because like what you have to believe in this movie is that Paul Atreides is aware of these like kind of political forces and aware of the way that like this Messiah narrative has been seeded by like his mom's religious sect, basically. But you have to believe that he takes like he drinks like worm blood, basically. And that alters his mind enough that he goes down this messianic path. Despite his misgivings. And I think on a narrative level, like screenplay wise, like they make it so it makes sense, but it's not made interesting. Like you just see him unconscious there, and then you get a few like little like dissolves showing his like visions or something. And
yeah,
I do think that like those points of the movie, which are like important hinge points, are kind of and the same thing happens to his mom also. And I think those are like really big hinge points in the movie that I don't think land for me either.
Yeah. And so I don't know, like there's really striking. I do have positives. The sequence when they go to the home planet of the Harkonnens,
that rocks. That part rocks.
And you're introduced to the Austin Butler's character in this like Coliseum, and the whole planet is like black and white, and it just has
because
like
they have like a black star, so like when they're indoors they're in color, then they'll walk out and all the color will just like drain from them. It's really neat.
It's just like it's this really cool effect, like that whole like sidetrack that you kind of just sidetrack over there for a while, and that's great. You know, you get like Austin Butler is once again going for it. He's fine. He's like rightful. He's doing what he needs to do to be, rightfully psychotic. Léa Seydoux shows up and is just doing Léa Seydoux stuff. Just that whole portion is just really is visually interesting and just very like a compact story in itself. Like they kind of cover that whole section pretty well. And like the sequences when he's riding the worm for the first time, like that's that kind of action sequence is great. But like even like the battle, the big battle, the big battle at the end, other than I like seeing all the worms show up and like go "Rah," and eat all the people at times. But even that battle just kind of felt like there was a lot going on visually, but I felt like I just never really felt invested in the narrative itself. It's kind of keeping you at this arm's length, and like you were talking about, you have this whole prophecy around Paul, and I don't know if this is a spoiler. I guess he becomes like Space Hitler, which is interesting. And so I don't know. I just had trouble buying into him as a character, and I wouldn't say it's all. I thought Timothée Chalamet is a lot better in this movie.
He's got more to do because in the first movie he's kind of like just learning, and in this movie he's actually got like dramatic tension.
He's a lot better in this, and I think that he gives one of the better performances. But I just don't. I just can't. The character doesn't do much for me in the whole, and I don't know. I feel I again go back to Denis Villeneuve's work. Just feels very like at arm's length from anything. Like I want to feel something. I don't ever feel anything in his movies, which I know I'm in the minority of because of how people respond to these two movies and Blade Runner 2049. And Arrival and things like that. Like I just don't feel any emotion from him. He's just a very emotionless director.
I think in terms of like specifically these Dune movies, which I like both of them. I felt like I actually liked this one less than the first one because I think the first one I was kind of like caught up in because I had seen the David Lynch one, which Grace, I know you watched this recently, but I don't really like the David Lynch one. I think it's hard to follow and I don't love it, but the first one, it was exciting because I was like, wow, this is like, evoking Dune in a way that like, yeah, is maybe like taking out some of the weirder stuff about Dune, but it's still like recognizably Dune. Like I remember reading it in the book and it feels serious. And, like I was kind of caught up in that. And I think the second movie struggles a little bit because it doesn't have like when they're setting up all the space like the warring like aristocratic families basically in the first movie, there's a really concrete vision for what those people are. Like there's really distinct like art and stuff like that that's associated with those things. And I think that this movie struggles with the Fremen to create that vibrant of a setting. And part of that is just because they're in the desert as opposed to in these big like mausoleum like antechambers or whatever. But I think also it's just that like I don't know. There's a kind of like Orientalism baked into Dune that is kind of tough to parse because on one hand it's like anti-imperialist, but on the other hand it is like kind of like I don't know, using like vague Arabic signifiers for.
I don't like
indigenous.
It. I struggle to get past that. I'll be honest.
And I think that like unlike the other families and unlike the other like factions, like this movie has trouble just not being like these guys are like pan-Arabic.
Yeah.
Like there's a few cool things like there's like an indoor like pool that's all their like collected water over generations and stuff like that stuff is cool, but for the most part the movie struggles with that. And I think it also struggles on a character level. Like I also am with you that like I didn't really feel anything about the characters, but I think like what this movie is kind of like banking on with Dune is that if we kind of prioritize the big ideas, if we prioritize like the politics and all that, that's what people are going to care about. And that way we won't have to try to shoehorn in like characters and stuff that like would be harder to evoke. Like I think like in adapting something like Dune that's like big and complex, they had to decide what to cut. And I think part of what they cut was that we're just turning all the characters into archetypes. And they're not going to be characters that you are emotionally invested in. They're going to be characters that you're interested in because of the ideas that they represent. And if you're not into the politics, or if you're not interested in those sorts of things, like I can see these movies being very tedious. I think the
Which
ideas are kind of cool, so I was into them, but I can see what you mean.
Which I'm fine just being like, hey, we got a bunch of archetypes and we're just gonna roll with that. Like I'm completely fine with that. I don't think Denis Villeneuve knows how to handle that compellingly in a way that's gonna like make you like I just think of like Spielberg's done that and he knows how to draw you in. Even if you want to look at more recent examples, I feel like something like Godzilla -1 or -0, I forgot what
It's
the name
minus
is.
one.
-1.
-0 would not be a minus at all.
I don't know. I'm sorry. But
Negative
like,
Godzilla.
yeah, Godzilla -1, like that's one where like the characters are very like one note, but it's a compelling one note. Like it works. And these just doesn't do it for me.
Yeah.
I really don't. I just don't get Zendaya. I don't. She offers nothing. She's just bland. She just kind of scowls the entire time. There's a lot of like emotional moments that were kind of require like an extra level of acting that like Florence Pugh is there and she's like able like she's not given a lot of scenes.
Dude, Florence Pugh is there like
She hits
encased in
it.
chainmail.
Yeah, she hits them though. Same with Rebecca Ferguson. She like gives it.
Javier Bardem's
Timothy-
really good in this movie.
Javier Bardem, and Zendaya just doesn't do much for me. And this isn't even just a Dune thing. This is I feel the same way about most of the movies she's done. I've never seen Euphoria, so I don't know about that. But I think she's like the big weak link in this. I don't know. Maybe she's like kind of shouldered now since Timothy Chalamet decided to be with Florence Pugh at the end of the spoiler alert, I guess, he picked Florence Pugh. I assume Zendaya will be in the third movie, but less so.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I don't know,
I don't
like,
know how Dune works.
I get what you're saying. And I think individually these characters aren't that interesting, but like where they do become interesting to me is when they're like in concert with one another. And again, like not as like the relationship like Paul and
Johnny.
Chani have like a romance. And I don't think that romance, I think that romance is fairly inert in the movie. But like what is interesting though is that they're kind of a dialectic as well, like where Paul is this religious figurehead or becomes this religious figurehead, whereas Chani is like a skeptic, right? Like, and I mean, if we're going to be really simplistic, it's almost like in, if you look at like a lot of the liberate like colonialist indigenous struggles, right? You had those like warring factions. You had like the kind of fundamentalist, like if we're going to go with like, I don't know what, like Afghanistan or something, like Afghanistan had like the secular communists who were fighting for liberation from like all sorts of people. And then they also had like the, fundamentalist religious people who were also kind of aligned in this one moment with them, but they all kind of knew that like this was kind of a shaky coalition. And I think that like they're interesting, like as presented as like the opposing forces of that dialectic, and how they interact is only interesting in so much as it informs that. And like as Paul is kind of forced or feels forced into like sincerely accepting his messianic role, how that affects his connection with Zendaya's character is interesting to me, not because I care about those characters, but because I think it's interesting to see these ideas explored in that way, to me. But yeah, I don't know.
Didn't work, or at least for me. So I don't know. I mean, it's one, if you're gonna go see this movie, go see it like in a theater. Like I went and saw it.
It looks cool.
I went and saw it in IMAX. Like that's the way to go do it. But I don't know. I just it's less Dune's fault more. I just don't think Denis Villeneuve does anything for me. But I've also felt this way for a while. My favorite of his is probably either like Sicario or Enemy.
Enemy's good.
Yeah.
So what you're saying is this movie wasn't doing too much for you?
It wasn't doing too much for me. All right. Well, let's move on to a slew of quote unquote bad movies that are currently playing on Criterion. And Grace, I want to start with you and the one that you watched.
Sure. I watched Showgirls. This was a second watch, a rewatch for me. This is a part of Criterion's Razzies movies. And I get why it's always considered that. I had my eyes open to the gospel of Showgirls maybe about 3 or 4 years ago. There was a showing at Central Cinema, and wow, my eyes have been open ever since. And this movie has been just ringing, dinging, pinging around in my brain, and I've never forgotten it. And sometimes I like to keep movies like that to just one watch so it can stay magical and so it can stay exactly how I remember it, something larger than life, something glitzy and glamorous. And I'm blinded by the neon lights of Las Vegas. But when this popped up on Criterion, I'm like, yes, I need another watch. I need to really try and make more sense of what I saw, because it is sensory overload. Showgirls is a story of Nomi Malone, played by Elizabeth Berkley, who has hitchhiked her way to Las Vegas in the hopes of becoming a dancer, whatever that may be. And this is someone who is hungry and is ready to climb her way up the ladder to get what she wants. And no one's going to stand in her way. Now, while she's there, she's also still a little bit naive, very gullible and trusting. And the person that picks her up as a hitchhiker drops her off at a casino, says, hey, gamble a little. Maybe you'll win some, maybe you'll lose some. And she falls under the spell of Las Vegas. She gambles, she loses, and the guy's gone, and all of her stuff is gone. So she is broke, hungry, poor, drunk. She's everything all at once. And there is one shining light of kindness in this sea of gambling and vice, and that is the friend that she makes in Molly. Molly is a young career girl as well, so there's that parallel with the two of them. They're both interested in the entertainment industry. They're both a part of the entertainment industry. We find out that Molly is a seamstress for one of the big shows, Goddess at the Stardust. And Molly shows Nomi the only scrap of affection, kindness, and true love that is not a quid pro quo, tit for tat. You give me something from you and I'll maybe consider giving you what you want. And that's the kind of relationship that Nomi has had her entire life. So their relationship is something so special, and to watch it bloom from the very beginning to what it eventually becomes is especially heartbreaking. But anyways, Nomi gets a job at the Cheetah dancing. What's the Cheetah? What does that sound like to you guys? A strip club. She's dancing at a topless bar, but she's a dancer. She's not a hooker. And that is like that's a big sticking point for Nomi, that what she does is dance, and she's going to dance, and she'll find a stage will find her. And she's kind of always performing throughout, but this club is what gives her, it sustains her. It's tough work, it's sex work, and this movie does a lot to explore and sort of, or to explore, at what point on this spectrum of sex work is it, explicit, inappropriate, illegitimate to, what is real dancing. So she dances at this club. She dances for money, but what she does isn't dancing, and there are multiple characters that will remind her of that. You call that dancing, but it's not. It's stripping. It's something to be looked down upon by the real dancers. And those real dancers are the dancers in this show, Goddess. Gina Gershon plays Crystal Connors. That is the big name in dancing at this show. She's the headliner, the resident dancer that this show is built around. And Nomi gets a taste of this show by hanging out backstage with Molly. She is completely taken in by the glitz and glamour, and she's like, I can do that, and I know I can. And you see that hunger in her eyes, and she's even picking up the routine just from one watch. So this is a very sharp and shrewd girl, and she has the talent, and she has the makings of something great, but it's just a question of how is she going to get that big break. while she's backstage, she butts heads with Crystal Connors. Molly introduces Nomi to Crystal and says, my friend Nomi is a dancer. And Nomi is so proud to share in this art with another woman, especially someone who is dancing like at the level that Nomi thinks that she should be in. But Crystal looks down on Nomi's dancing, and that is just the ultimate heartbreak and betrayal. So they butt heads, and then it seems as though throughout the movie, Crystal shows up at every opportunity to antagonize Nomi and to remind her, I'm a real dancer and you're a whore. And that's so heartbreaking. But there's also this sort of like, there's a real sexuality between the two of them, like a real sort of chemistry, that's the word, a real sort of chemistry between Crystal and Nomi, as Nomi wants to be Crystal. Is it that she wants to be Crystal? Does she want Crystal? Crystal most certainly wants Nomi, explicitly, carnally, however you want to, look at it. There's definitely like a sort of queering to this story that makes this probably so popular with the queer community. It's very campy, and every line is a line, and everybody's gorgeous. But I want to go back to what I was saying about how like this movie, explores the spectrum of sexuality. It sort of asks this question: at what point is the dancing like real dancing, and when is it, it's much more explicit? Nomi works at the topless bar, and it's advertised as a topless bar, and that there's topless dancing, and that it's stripping, so you know exactly what it is. And you go there seeking some entertainment, to be titillated, to be aroused, and to sort of pay for that pleasure. And then goddess, that is so, what does that evoke? Like just something divine and above everything. And it's also topless dancing, but you are confronted with it from the very beginning. These fabulous dancers come out on this gorgeous big stage. Well, Nomi dances on a stage too. There's just a pole on hers. So what's the difference? Constantly, this movie is asking you to sort of reflect, on what you're seeing, and also within yourself, like, what's the difference? There's this one character, James, that Nomi connects with. He's a bouncer at another club, the Crave Club, where Nomi just goes just to like dance like no one is watching. And the way that she dances, I mean, it's all fire, it's all passion, it's these hard movements. You hear her grunting and groaning. Like there's like, she's not dancing, it's like she's fighting. And it's like she's fighting some demons within herself, or fighting the world around her, fighting for her space on the dance floor. And I really love to watch it. It's electric. This movie is amazing. Like, I don't think that people really give it enough credit, because there's so much explicit sex and topless behavior, but this movie is amazing. You chart the rise and fall of a young and hungry actress, showgirl, dancer, and as she fights her way to the top to fight for herself, her identity, free from the scrutiny and free from the like sexualizing of everyone around her. Everybody wants her for her body, and yes, what she's selling is her body, which is dancing, but like they want to take that from her, and she just wants to express that. Her sexuality is constantly the center of at all of the transactions. She's selling her body at the strip club. She's selling her body on stage. She's selling her body after hours as an experience for businessmen coming to Las Vegas to pay for the privilege of. She can't escape it. And you watch her at every turn trying so hard to distance herself, to claw with her well-manicured nails out of this muck, out of this cesspool that is Las Vegas, that is sucking the life out of her. And it's so upsetting, because what really gets her out of it is a very graphic and awful, tragic assault. I won't say who it happens to because, Michael, you haven't seen it. There might be some people listening. I really don't want to spoil that because it is so powerful, but it is powerfully upsetting as well. And it's finally when we are confronted with the violent assault, it's, taking that sort of violence to the next level, that sort of implied violence in every sort of transaction, that we're confronted with it, the sexual violence, and it snaps Nomi out of this world. She realizes that this isn't worth it. This is eating me alive. I'm a victim, and I can't get out of this. And then it turns into a really cool split-second revenge of kill or maim or brutalize your rapist, which is so good. I love that. Like, I fully endorse that message. And she takes her leave from Las Vegas after finally asserting herself and enacting the same sort of violence on these predators that they've been dreaming about, or fully enacting on someone else the entire time she's been in Vegas. The last line, she meets the same guy that picked her up when she hitchhiked to Las Vegas. He's taking her out of Las Vegas. He says, did you gamble? How'd it go? And she says, she gambles everything. She loses everything, but she says, I won myself. So like she got herself back. So this movie is just so powerful in watching that arc, and it's tender at some moments. It's also very critical of our consumer culture, what we consume, our gambling, all of our various vices and addictions, in Sin City, this city that is all about that caters to, the expressing of those vices. It's amazing. I cannot imagine why anybody would think that this is a bad movie if they just sat and thought critically for one single second, instead of just being like, well, I'm confronted by too much sexuality and that turns me off and that makes a bad movie. But like, it's almost it's practically perfect to me. And it really touches something in me and really winds me up, clearly. But
Yeah.
this is wonderful. That's all. I could go on. I'm a little out of breath. I'm just like so pumped about this. It's special. It is.
Well, it's on Criterion Channel right now. It's for people who just listen to Grace gushing and have not seen it. So check it out there. Big check mark behind it right now from Cinematary.
It is interesting, like looking at that list of like the Razzies, because like these are all like movies that have won like Razzies for like the worst of their year or whatever, which the Razzies have really terrible taste regardless. But like it is interesting the movies that are on there, like the movies that like kind of like in the moment garner like these almost like feverish, like people hate them kind of movies. But then in retrospect, a lot of times people end up like kind of liking them or finding things to like about them. It's just interesting how like certain movies strike a chord in and just inspire such hate. And there's a really interesting episode of You Must Remember This. It's about Showgirls and kind of the backlash to it as well, which I have listened to that. I've not actually watched the movie.
I have not listened to that. I hope that they are also on the side that this is a fabulous movie that doesn't really deserve it. It asks a lot of us, asks a lot of its audience, and confronts a lot of just like a lot of internalized self-hate and
yeah, she's pro Showgirls.
Cool. Good. I will listen to that then. Okay.
Michael, we got about 6 or 7 minutes. You had
right, I'm gonna lightning round my samples of. No, it's fine. I'm gonna lightning round my samples. So like I do think it's interesting. Like sometimes you watch these movies that are like notorious for being like the worst ever, and you watch them and you're like, why do people hate that movie? And sometimes you watch them and you're like, oh, I see why people hate this movie. And I kind of have both reactions to the two movies that I watched. So the first movie I watched was Ishtar, which is the Elaine May, basically the movie that ended Elaine May's career as a director.
Yeah.
And this movie I watched and I was like, this is a weird movie to have ended someone's career. Because it's a comedy about these two flailing songwriters who basically are really low talent songwriters, played by Dustin Hoffman and Warren Beatty. And they're hilarious because she got a real songwriter to write songs for this movie intentionally that were bad, but like believably bad. And on top of that, Warren Beatty and Dustin Hoffman are not particularly good musicians. And so these two musicians are so desperate to book gigs that they get a gig in Morocco. And while in Morocco, one of them accidentally becomes a CIA agent, or not a CIA agent, a CIA asset. And the other of them accidentally becomes an asset for the left-wing insurgency in Ishtar, which is like the fictional country that apparently borders Morocco. And so they unknowingly become pawns of like the kind of imperialist and anti-imperialist sides of like a political struggle. And this movie is really funny for stretches. It struggles with the politics, making them interesting. Charles Grodin is the CIA agent, and he's really good as the CIA agent, but it's not particularly funny. I don't know. It's kind of weird to me because Elaine May has some really good like left-wing bona fides in her backstory, or not backstory, but like in her career. Like she's done like writing on really interesting movies that are sympathetic to like left-wing causes. And this movie is trying to be that while also trying to be this kind of like farce about these like talentless hacks who are pretending to be the next Simon and Garfunkel. And the movie really loses steam when it tries to start doing the politics. Unfortunate, because that was the thing that was interesting about this movie to me. But the parts of the movie that are just about them being musicians and loser musicians are so funny. Like there's at the end, they, for reasons that are spoilery, they get a record deal. And the last like 10 minutes of the movie or something is just their concert that is part of their record deal. And the songs that they sing are so funny. Like they're so bad. And I don't know. I thought this movie was not perfect. Like I said, it's got some like kind of down moments, but overall it's like really good. And like from what I can read, the reason why people really didn't like it is that like it was an AstroTurf campaign for people not to like it. Like Elaine May had like pissed off people in the studio, and like there were people who didn't like Warren Beatty and stuff like that. And like the shoot had gone over budget, and there were conflicting visions about how creatively the movie should go. And so like the movie was kind of like nerfed by its own studio. And anyway, I mean, there's reasons not to like this movie. I mean, talk about problematic depictions of, people in the third world. Is definitely part and parcel of this movie. But I don't know, not worthy of destroying Elaine May's career.
No, because you think about it, like every movie outside of this one, like every movie she had made at this point, from A New Leaf to Heartbreak Kid to Mikey and Nikki, are like just all timers. Like,
well, and I thought at first
all those movies are perfect
too. I thought I was watching one of those too, like the first 30 minutes or whatever, when they're in New York and they're struggling songwriters, like this movie is amazing. And it does kind of run aground once it gets to Morocco and Ishtar, but not enough to say that Elaine May can never direct the movie again. It's absurd.
Yeah, it's
now,
crazy.
On the other hand, Freddy Got Fingered was the other movie I watched. And you watch it and you're like, oh, so this movie universally panned when it comes out. Like people hate it. The critics hate it. It stars
Grace
Tom Green. Yeah, Grace hates it. I'm not sure if I hate it or not, but like you watch this movie, it's like, oh, I get why people didn't like this movie, because it's a movie seemingly premised on like trying to get everyone to dislike it. Like it's very gross, it's very transgressive in that kind of like MTV, like Eminem style, like her. I'm like, just for yucks, I'm gonna do something gross and say the R slur and things like that. Like that's not cool. And I get people not liking that. On the other hand, it is so singularly strange. Like it is deeply surreal. I've seen a lot of people, I think this is accurate, like call it an early example of kind of like anti-humor, where the whole point of the movie is not to be funny, but to like set up things that other movies would say would be funny, and then just take it in a direction that's really either tasteless or just like unfunny and just bizarre. So like as a forerunner to like Tim and Eric and that sort of thing. And I can see that this movie could have had an influence on Tim and Eric. But man, is it unpleasant. There's just a lot of just gross stuff in it. Like there's not one, but two scenes in which animals are like masturbated by Tom Green, the main character. And they're both large animals too. One's a horse and one's an elephant. There's a scene which this is where the title of the movie comes, where it's like a big bizarre thing that like out of nowhere Tom Green accuses his dad of being a child molester and having molested his younger brother or older brother. I'm not sure which brother it is. And that's like a bit for like 4 minutes in the movie and then is gone. Like, and that's how the movie is. It's like this surreal like nightmare of like really bizarre like stuff that is really outrageous. Like it's truly like no other movie I've seen. And on that level, I admire it, but also it's just thoroughly unpleasant. I think like it was trying to be unpleasant. Like I think Tom Green, if I'm remembering, if I read this right, Tom Green is the only director to have in person accepted his Razzie Award. Like he seems to have wanted the movie to be hated, and that is kind of an interesting experiment. I don't know. I would not recommend this movie to anyone unless, I don't know. It actually kind of feels like it feels like in the same conversation as like Jackass or something like that, which I don't really like either, but I know a lot of people actually do like, where a lot of it is just like kind of gross and doing outrageous stuff. The difference with Jackass is that there's a sweetness and a camaraderie to that. And you kind of become endeared to all the various like characters. Whereas this one, it's like intentionally making you hate all of these characters. Like there's not a single person who's not just like loathsome or irritating on some way, and that's like seemingly by design. And so it's like all the scatological grossness of Jackass, or even like an Adam Sandler type comedy, like pushed to like 11, but without any of the kind of like sweetness or even maudlin elements that sometimes like I think soften those things. So I don't know. Freddy Got Fingered, I guess I'm glad I watched it because it was an experience, but I don't know what I think about it. The end.
And there you go.
There you have it.
That's a movie that's been talked about on the podcast before, but it's been a very long time.
Has it?
Yeah.
I can imagine Nadine Smith being a fan of Freddy Got Fingered.
That's who talked about it.
Okay. Yeah, it seems like a vulgar arturist like reclamation in like made ready.
Yeah. All right. Well, we're gonna take a quick break, and then we are gonna be back and we're gonna find out whatever happened to Baby Jane in part 2.
I've written a letter to Daddy. His address is heaven above. I've written, dear Daddy, we miss you and wish you were with us to love.
And we're back
Instead
with part
of
2
a
of
stamp, I
episode
put
470 of
kisses.
Cemetery. In this part, we're going to be concluding our Betty and Joan series with 1962's Whatever Happened to Baby Jane. Directed by Robert Aldrich from a script by Lucas Heller, the film stars Bette Davis, Joan Crawford, Victor Buono, and Vanessa Redgrave. Jane Hudson is an aging child star left to care for her wheelchair-bound sister Blanche, also a former child actress. Stuck living together in a mansion in Old Hollywood, Blanche plots to get even with Jane for the car crash that left her crippled years earlier, but Jane is desperate to keep Blanche imprisoned as she plans a new rise to fame and tries to hide Blanche's existence from doctors, visitors, and neighbors, while she devises a way to get rid of her sister. In March 1960, the New York Times announced the publication of Henry Farrell's novel, Whatever Happened to Baby Jane. 3 weeks later, the LA Times reported that producer Richard Rush was negotiating for motion picture rights with plans to star Hugh O'Brien, Agnes Moorehead, and Jennifer West. The project remained in limbo until September 1961, when Variety stated that Robert Aldrich would direct the film. The October 4th, 1961, Variety reported that actress Joan Crawford was meeting with Aldrich that day to discuss her role. The film would mark her first screen appearance in several years, the last of which was Autumn Leaves in 1956, also directed by Aldrich. In the January 15th, 1962 LA Times, columnist Hedda Hopper, which you, Hedda Hopper, announced that Crawford would co-star with Bette Davis, marking the first screen collaboration between the two veteran actresses. The New York Times revealed that Crawford approached Aldrich several years earlier, suggesting he make a film starring her and Davis. Although the director rejected the story Crawford proposed, he was intrigued by the idea of co-starring the two actresses. In the September 16, 1962 LA Times, Hedda Hopper wrote about her invitation of Crawford and Davis to her home for a, quote, interview dinner while filming was in progress. Crawford dispelled rumors of a feud between herself and Davis, explaining that she had wanted to collaborate with her co-star since 1944, when they were both under contract for Warner Brothers. Producer William Fry recommended the source novel to Davis 2 years earlier, but was unable to secure motion picture rights. Davis then offered the story to director Alfred Hitchcock, but he had other commitments. The October 24th, 1962 Variety later quoted Davis from a television interview saying the two women had, quote, too much pride to quarrel. The August 22nd, 1962 Variety confirmed the friendly on-set atmosphere. I'm going to say that from now on, as you know, I'm not angry at somebody. We have too much pride to quarrel. In August 1962, the Theater Owners of America, concerned by the scarcity of Hollywood's films outside holiday seasons, established a committee to organize guaranteed bookings and preview screenings. This film became the first release to benefit from this program. By October, the National Screen Service began distributing special theater accessories for the preview screenings, and Davis embarked on a 3-day tour of New York City theaters during the week of November 7th, 1962, participating in 17 screenings, one of which featured a children's music marching band welcoming her with When the Saints Go Marching In.
That's wild. A movie about a really deranged child star is introduced by a bunch of child performers.
She expressed her preference to film over live theater to reporters and humorously advertised her availability to Hollywood studios and trade publications. She worked with singer Debbie Burton to record the song Whatever Happened to Baby Jane, which appeared among the week's top singles in Variety. Davis later credited the film with resurrecting her film career. In 1962, the New York Times said Davis and Crawford do get off some amusing and eventually blood-chilling displays of screaming sororal hatred and general monstrousness. The feeble attempts that Mr. Aldrich has made to suggest the irony of two once idolized and wealthy females living in such depravity, and the pathos of their deep-seated envy having brought them to this washout very quickly under the flood of sheer grotesquerie. There is nothing moving or particularly significant about these two. And Variety in 1962 said teaming Bette Davis and Joan Crawford now seems like a veritable prerequisite to putting Henry Farrell's slight tale of terror on the screen. Although the results heavily favored Davis and she earns the credit, it should be recognized the plot of necessity allows her to run unfettered through all the stages of oncoming insanity. Crawford gives a quiet, remarkably fine interpretation of the crippled Blanche, held in emotionally by the nature and temperament of the role. Physically confined to a wheelchair and bed through the picture, she has to act from the inside and has her best scenes because she wisely underplays with Davis, with a maid, and those she plays alone. All right. On that note, let's talk about whatever happened to Baby Jane.
Whatever happened to the critics calling this slight? Calling this like a washout or whatever.
This movie was good. This was the OG Razzies. This is what we're dealing with. This movie's wonderful. Grace, tell us about your feelings on Baby Jane.
Baby Jane was my introduction to both Crawford and Davis, and what really spawned this idea of a series for me. To watch Baby Jane is to watch sort of the stories of Crawford and Davis. Like, they play each part so well as they both speak to bits and pieces from their own stories, their own lives, and their own careers. So it's very well cast, is very well grounded in a reality for these two women to then just run amok with fabulous performance. It is campy and quotable. It is tender and sad. Like, especially the relationship between Elvira, Blanche's caretaker or, you know, part-time maid, and Blanche herself. That seemed to be a real friendship, and certainly a friendship that that Davis does not have with anyone in any way. So this plays on the decay of Hollywood. Their house is you know, old money, the money that Hollywood built, and I think it's also interesting that this is in the 60s, so this is after like the studio system breakup. So the Hollywood that, you know, these women came up in, or that Blanche came up in, does not exist anymore. They have to move on. And I love the costumes. I love how over the top everything is. I love the little bits of violence. It does such a really nice job to sort of cut through what is otherwise a pretty sedated. You know, she just holds her sister hostage and starves her. That's very passive. But then when the real violence, the real snap of killing takes over, the mania and the last resort kicks in, then this movie sort of turns into something much more sinister. But all of that is to say that this is the culmination of these two women, their careers, their comeback, and what a comeback. You know, don't call it a comeback. They've been here for years, but this just really sets them apart. Sort of, don't forget them. They're not out to pasture yet, and there's still plenty of amazing performances left in these two titans of Hollywood.
Yeah. So. Michael, what about you?
I really like this. I said this a second ago before we started recording, but I had only heard of this in the context of it being a campy movie, and like how Bette Davis as Jane is just camp, which like there's an aspect of that to this movie, but like I don't think it's like Idol that like Alfred Hitchcock was considered for the directing of this movie. Like it has that kind of feel of, you know, very, very tense and very like motivated by like almost like Freudian or like, you know, psychological terror, you know. And I don't know, like this movie's really messed up, like to be honest. Like she's like, I don't know, like it, there are moments of it that kind of shook me a little bit. Like the kind of like prolonged abuse of her sister is just so like Grace said, there's the kind of like passive stuff, like I'm not going to give you dinner, or I'm not going to cook you breakfast, right? And then there's like the really kind of shocking violence, like her sister is like out of her wheelchair and immobile, and she like beats her into unconsciousness and things like that. It's just like, I don't know. I don't know. I wasn't quite prepared for it being like a movie that would kind of like unsettle me, but I thought it was like deeply unsettling, and also great because Bette Davis and Joan Crawford are both really good in this. And
yeah,
I was just gonna say great movie to end this series on because they're both in top form.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I think it was the Variety review is just kind of like Bette Davis gets just unfettered access to just go insane for the most part. But at the same time, like I think it's still like what I was thinking about while watching is something we've talked about throughout the series is she's still able to like create a character. Like Baby Jane is a very specific character, and she just has that ability to kind of craft that person into like a full picture. Like you understand who Jane Hudson is from Baby Jane to Jane Hudson like today. And it's not just her like running around acting like a lunatic or anything. Like it's very like calculated, like the way she'll like move her face in reaction to stuff that Blanche will say or Elvira will say, or even like the neighbor, like the way she approaches, the neighbor, Lisa Redgrave. I think it's Lisa Redgrave.
Vanessa.
My favorite example of that is like Jane is like about to drive like a body out of out of her
Yeah.
house, and the neighbor comes over and is like, "I saw the lights on. I thought you might have left your car lights on." And Jane's just like, "I didn't."
And just trying to
it's just
instigate
like
small
totally
talk.
stonewalling her. Yeah.
It's like having a neighbor and just kind of be like, "Yeah, so weather's been crazy lately," it's like that, and she's just like, "No." You were gonna say something, Grace?
Oh yeah, I completely agree. Like Betty crafts this character that, and then we keep talking around the psychology of it. This is a child star that's had to like support and provide for her family from day one, so she already has that sense of obligation as well as the feeling of responsibility, and also it ages her. So she's like she has to be a grown up, and then those moments of petulant childhood that rear its ugly head when she's fighting and crying for ice cream instead of having to take her nap after her show. And I think that should, and then she's always been that. She's always been that, the performer and then petulant, the performer and then petulant child, adult, toddler, teenager thing. She doesn't get to just be a kid, and in those moments where she's lashing out and acting out, she's reaching out for a connection with her sister. So then the two never connect. And so that has like hindered their relationship from the very beginning.
Because the whole relationship's like hinged on business, like
Yeah.
like they never talk, like when even when it picks up that present day, like they're always it's always about money, and it's always about like the house, and it's always about like financial decisions and things like that. Or Blanche's health, or Jane's health. Like it's all
Right.
based on stuff that has nothing related to them as people.
Right. I think the movie does a good job of like kind of having those sympathies that you have for characters be kind of slippery. I mean, there's a big kind of twist at the end that is meant to be in some ways a reversal of sympathies. But even like as you go on, like there's like the opening scene of the movie is when she's still a child, and you have her like performing, doing a little Shirley Temple type routine, and then you have the after, that's kind of cute. And then there's like afterwards, she's like a total petulant brat, about the ice cream. And at least for me, I'm like, man, like what a tool. Like I hate kids like that. And then but then they start getting into like the power dynamics and the money of it, like in that scene. And then you start kind of like pitying her. And then she goes, they jump like, a few decades later, and she's totally washed out, and that's kind of sad at first. And then she's like starts torturing her sister, and that's not, I don't know, like the movie is really tricky in terms of like, where does it allow you to find like your rest? Like Blanche is in some ways like the character you want to find sympathy for, but in other ways, like Blanche is someone who's been pitted against Jane in unfair ways to both her and Jane her whole life. And I think that makes it so that she's obviously like abused by her sister, so you feel bad for her on that level. But on another level, like what's like messed these people up is way bigger than their specific relationship, which is most of what you see in the movie is their relationship. And I don't know. I think the movie is really nuanced and interesting in that way.
Absolutely. Like I think like their big problem is that they're in showbiz. I mean, having like, we didn't really talk about this in All About Eve, but you get the sense that there can only be like one popular, like there can only be one person at the top. There's only like the one actor. There's only the one that's like the moneymaker that can exist solely as the artist, the center of attention. And so it's so interesting to watch. Blanche had that moment in the sun for a second, and then she gets it again organically. So she dominates two mediums, two art forms, film and television, and Jane only has the stage. And so she has to create her comeback, and she just doesn't have it. But Blanche's happens so organically. And so again, that's just like another nail in this rivalry coffin. But
Which is just so great as she's trying to like stage her comeback. Just the sequence of Victor Buono at the piano as she's performing the number that she performed as a child, like just incredible. Like,
yeah. Did people, Zach? Did you see in any of the reviews or anything? Did people connect this to Sunset Boulevard? Because I feel like that there's like a real big overlap there.
No, but I saw Letterboxd people kind of going like this would make a good. I saw some people comparing it to Gone Girl, and I was like, no, it's not very. It's not like Gone Girl at all. But if you did like a double feature of this and Sunset Boulevard, that would be much more in line.
Yeah, well, because they're both interesting in terms of the passage of time. Also means the turn of like the ascendant media as well. So like this movie starts in 1917, where the stage was actually a much bigger, venue for acting and stuff. Similar to like how in Sunset Boulevard, like silent films, were like the, something you could make a career out of. And then like as time passes and the medium changes that like people are actually interested in where the money is, that leaves some people washed out and like without a place to go.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really that would be a very perfect double feature, because that was a movie that I was thinking about while watching this, is just that kind of that transition between dominant mediums. Because I mean, you think about like Grace was mentioning before, like Blanche, was the film star. But then, when you pick up in the present day, she's having like that kind of second life on television as they're starting to replay her movies.
Right.
And like the neighbors coming over saying, oh, we saw her movie on television. I remember, she's recollecting going to see it on a date with her husband.
Oh, that fan letter. It was like meeting an old friend. Yeah. That was so tender. I loved that moment.
What if people wrote letters like that instead of like weird social media death threat mobs?
Yeah.
Instead of weird like stuff on social media. Yeah. That would be nice. Yeah. But yeah, no, I think that's an apt comparison. And I honestly, we mentioned Hitchcock before. The other movie I was thinking about was Psycho, just in terms of like the kind of like you get a lot more agency with Blanche, and you see her. She's not like Norman Bates's mother, but at the same time, she kind of has this almost like ethereal behind the door quality whenever it's really Jane dominating the screen, and especially late in the film, it starts to kind of give the feelings of Psycho as these different characters start funneling through the house. And kind of wondering what's going on upstairs.
Yeah, you do kind of expect someone to really take a fall down those stairs.
I actually was waiting on that.
Like kind of bracing for someone to fall down those stairs. The stairs that upstairs, downstairs. I mean, she's been trapped upstairs for forever. You would think that they wouldn't place someone with limited mobility at the top of stairs that she can't get up or down. You would think that Blanche would live on maybe the bottom floor and have more access to the home that she owns. But no,
it seems like it wasn't her choice.
That wasn't a choice.
That's
another thing. Oh gosh.
Which I guess the Psycho comparison makes sense. Psycho came out 2 years before this. Maybe that's why Hitchcock was busy.
He's busy.
Yeah. We talked a little bit about Bette Davis, and I thought that's why I talk a little bit more about Joan. I thought that's why I added the Variety review, because they talk a little bit more about her performance, because it is very like quiet and sedated in comparison, because Bette Davis is doing a lot, which is great. Yeah. And then Joan's doing, having to be the kind of play off that as the person doing a lot more reserved performance. And it's true, like in the scenes when it's Bette and Joan, Bette is just so, is just kind of consuming the screen, is so dominating that that Joan has to kind of fall into the submissive role, and she becomes much more interesting, and like is making a lot of interesting choices when you think of like the scene when she writes the note and is trying to get it to the neighbor out the window, or when she's trying to crawl down the stairs to like get on the phone. She gives like if you're looking at this like a kind of in the horror movie mold, like as like the kind of final girl, like the horror lead against the monster, she plays that type of archetype pretty well in this.
Yeah, and there's a real like physicality to what she does later in the movie too. I mean, a lot of the early goings in the movie is her just kind of reacting to Betty Davis, but then like when she starts like like the whole like part that begins with her trying to go to like leaving her chair and like crawling downstairs and stuff, like up through like the end of the movie basically, where she's got to like be dying of like exposure and being beaten by her sister basically.
Starved.
And starved. Like there's like she starts to embody the like physical toll of the role in a way that Betty Davis is never really asked to do, which is also fine. But I do think it's like interesting because like the sweat and like the desperation in like what Joan Crawford is doing in like the last like 30 minutes of this movie is just really compelling. And like that part of the movie wouldn't work if that wasn't like a credible performance, but it is.
Yeah, it reminds me real quick. It reminds me a little bit of like what Jimmy Stewart has to do in Rear Window. Just another like wheelchair bound character, like who's just kind of having to give a lot, like that way because you're unable to have that physicality.
I think again that just speaks to what the two styles, the two mediums that these women act within. This is probably like my big thesis for this entire series, that like Betty is big and loud and bombastic and creates a character given her background in theater. And then again, Jane commands the space with her voice and her and all of that. So that's why her emotions are so much bigger and she plays it so loud and for the people in the back row. And then Joan, again, having come up in movies first and then Blanche as a movie star dealing in medium to extreme close-ups, her in the wheelchair and all of her action being close and, just facial expressions, but really careful and thoughtful and evocative facial expressions, just like the flaring of these big, gorgeous eyes, even still with her lashes. She has all of the demure, quiet, smoldering glamour of a Hollywood star, even in this, less than glamorous state that she's in throughout. She makes you lean in to the screen to catch what she's saying, to catch what she's doing. And then with Betty, it kind of like, as Jane, it kind of throws you back. They just play off each other so well because it's like they're playing and acting in two completely different styles or two completely different movies. Like their performances don't really match, but that meshes them so well. Sets them as individuals, as sisters, as two unique individuals.
Yeah, it is interesting, Zach, to hear that like they weren't the initial people considered for these roles because, and I mean, this movie is iconic, and so maybe it's retroactive to say this, or revisionist to say this, but like this just feels like the type of movie that would have been created with these two actresses in mind, like written to their parts or written to their individual strengths or whatever, because I don't know, like it does feel like it encapsulates a lot of like what they're known for in their careers, like up to and including Betty Davis's character having a background in theater. Like it's like really weird, like how it feels like so tailored to their individual like arcs as performers, that they were not the first choices for this movie.
That's interesting because I read in my sources tell me that when Bob Aldrich was the one who like was negotiating buying rights to this before he came on, and what I read is that he approached both of them thinking that like this is the movie for them, and that both women were like, yeah, absolutely. Betty even said, that's us, Phony Joni and, Mad Bet. And
Phony Joni.
yeah, Phony Joni. That was like
Phony Joni,
Phony Joni.
Mad
Yeah.
Bet.
All right.
Oh my God.
Okay. But that was the reputation that these women had in Hollywood when they're being pit against each other. And then here they are pit against each other again in this movie. And then the climactic ending when Betty says, you mean this whole time we could have been friends? It's like, oh, that could have been their relationship. They work so well together, even with all of the like vicious tit for tat and backbiting. I think that I read somewhere that during rehearsals, Betty actually kicked Joan in the head during, run-throughs of that violent beating. And then, but again, this is like very gossipy and I don't know how true that is. But then as the story goes, when Betty has to pull Joan from the bed to like run to the beach, Joan is wearing weights. And so Betty throws out her back. And so like she gets her back. I mean, like the culture on set is one of like very calculated show business one-upmanship. And you get to the end and the end result is this fabulous movie. You mean this whole time we could have been friends? This whole time we could have been like some dynamic duo, like taking the screen by storm. Absolutely, I agree. Like this is so their story, and this is their legacy and their history, and just an incredible movie that just seems that it is just the story of them, but if they were sisters instead of.
All my sources are Ryan Murphy's FX show.
All of my sources are The Divine Feud. I'm so sorry, friends of Joan Crawford.
Yeah. No, that's I mean the Bob Aldrich stuff is true. He wasn't the first director they approached. Like with the source material. Yeah. Has anybody have either of you watched the Ryan Murphy FX show?
No. Is it good? I have kind of an allergy to Ryan Murphy, but
I do too. He sucks.
Oh, all three of us. Okay, cool.
He's the worst.
Wait, so you haven't seen it either?
No.
I'm not like gonna say he can never do anything good. Maybe this thing's good.
Yeah, this was to be honest, this was the only one that I was kind of interested in, mainly because I hadn't seen Whatever Happened to Baby Jane previous to that, which it's about like the filming process of that, correct? Yeah, and so like the fact Ryan Murphy, all of his stuff is campy, like that's just style, and so kind of going back to the point, Michael, you were making at the beginning was like I was like, oh well, if this is like a campy classic, then like that would make like it would seem natural that somebody like Ryan Murphy who like makes campy TV shows and stuff. Like that would make sense, but after watching the movie, I'm just kind of like, I don't know. That seems like a whole different vibe than what this actually is.
Yeah, I do feel like that. There's a moment in like pop history, and it maybe the inflection point is the 1960s, but there's a moment in which like culture becomes self-aware of camp, as opposed to camp being like a natural phenomenon that occurs within the industry, and like. So like someone like John Waters is clearly trading in camp, but it's like the intentional creation of camp, and what all the other things John Waters is doing. Whereas like this movie, like I can see, I mean, Joan Davis is like vamping. She is like, I mean, there must be like a 1,000 drag queens who are like Baby Jane, right? Like
absolutely.
I have to imagine like. And I can see where the connection to camp is, but I think like now when we think of camp, we think of something that is its own self-parody, and that has not like for a while like camp was almost like a found object, like this thing that was sincerely made. We find little elements of it that are kind of exaggerated, and that's the thing we latch onto. I don't know. I have to imagine that's what people mean with this movie, at least, because like it's not campy in the same way that like a Ryan Murphy thing is campy.
Because it's good.
But I mean, there's good stuff that is like
I just mean that this is good when compared to anything
compared
that
to
Ryan
Ryan
Murphy would
Murphy.
hope to do, and that's why this operates on another level, is because it's very well actualized and very well done. And
not to dive into a whole Ryan Murphy
we don't
thing.
need to, but
I think like I think the most camp he gets would probably be Glee, which I feel like is less intentional. This is like intentionally like trying to be, going back to your point, like this one is, and a lot of the stuff he's done since is like intentionally trying to be, and so like that lack of genuine spirit, I think, that genuine spirit of camp, is lacking in like something like Feud maybe, but this one is just like, I mean, that's why you get, like, the reason this works is that's why you get Bette Davis and Joan Crawford, because not to like trivialize their performances, but like they're gonna ham it up, like they're gonna go 150% on this. And if you had other actresses, like they might be trying to do, they would make different choices with the characters, and the fact that like both of these actresses play Blanche and Jane so specifically, like, again, like going back to the point with Betty, like they both create specific characters with that, rather than trying to, like in this period of time, you're getting more into like the actor studio. You're not necessarily like in method acting or anything yet, but acting is becoming much more of like an artistic,
trying to be naturalistic.
Yeah, a naturalistic artistic endeavor rather than like a job. And like Betty and Joan, like they're old Hollywood actresses. They it was a job, like it's, and so like I think that kind of adds to it, rather than having, if you had anyone else kind of playing these roles at this period in Hollywood. Any final thoughts on whatever happened to Baby Jane? Any first in the movie, any closing thoughts on it?
It's also funny. Like, there's some things that are really funny in this movie. Like, there's
Super
the
funny
one line.
movie.
There's the one line where like Joan Crawford's like, "Well, if I wasn't in this wheelchair," and then Bette Davis is like, "But you are."
that chair. That is like the line when you say like this is campy and like there are drag queens that do this.
That part is very funny.
That is just so ingrained in queer culture. This fabulous movie, but yeah.
This one's just littered with lines, though. Bette Davis had me cracking up the entire time. Like she's just throwing lines back. And it's not even just at Blanche. It's at Elvira. It's at the neighbor. It's at
the feud with the neighbor is the funniest to me.
The
neighbor is just like, you can see Jane being the most normal person ever and still being justifiably irritated with this neighbor. You're kind of on Jane's side.
Putting her nose into everything.
Yeah. Like and then just the whole sequence with the Victor Buono character, when he's just like, she's trying to make this comeback, and like you can just read on his face that this lady is insane, but he also is just like, I need some cash.
Yeah.
Until the end, when he runs out and she's like, "Wait, take your money," and he's like, "No."
Like, it's an incredibly funny movie throughout. Grace, any final thoughts on the Betty and Joan series, like as a whole? Did you feel like you learned anything new from watching through these movies in succession?
I think that I gained more of an understanding for these women as artists, as actresses, as business women. I definitely got more of a history lesson in Hollywood from the early stages throughout, as these women are Hollywood and they chart the rises and falls, the ups and downs of Hollywood studio system as we know it. So this is like a fabulous, education in film. I am very grateful that we even did this series. It's very special and near and dear to my heart, and I think I will always cherish it. But
what is your podcast?
That I share with you guys.
Benevolently.
Begrudgingly, I share the spotlight.
Yeah.
I mean, clearly I'm Baby Jane here. Like, it's all about.
There you go.
But I was just it's very exciting to see and chart and plot the span of two very influential I keep saying this, but titans of the industry. They are just, maybe to plenty of people that they are not just like the end all be all, but I just think that they're the best at what they do. And I think that they're so emblematic of what Hollywood could be on two different ends of the spectrum. So this is just a perfect way to end it. This is the culmination of their careers and life story, and the culmination of a podcast well done, if I do say so myself. But
I mean, that's why people are mobbing you in the streets of Knoxville.
Hey, we've been getting the YouTube comments have been popping off. Like, Grace is making some friends and enemies. It's been crazy.
I'm controversial. What can I say? Everything about me is conversation and controversy, but I'm still just a normal person.
That's right. Yeah, just remember all those little folks when you hit the big time.
I'll make sure to lift you all up. I'll remember you.
On that note, that'll wrap up this episode of Cinematary. You can find us on Facebook at facebook.com/Cinematary, and on Instagram and Twitter at @Cinematary, and on Letterboxd at letterboxd.com/Cinematary, where we list the movies that we talked about in this episode. If you would like to support the show, if you would like to, I don't know, like give $5 to be like, Grace is great. If you're mobbing Grace in the streets, you should mob Cinematary in the Patreon field and give us $5 a month. But thanks to our patrons, Cam, Ron Hayes, Tanner Huskins, Teresa Marthathi, and Tyler Chandler. We appreciate your patronage. Next episode, we're going to be kicking off another actor series, but it's just going to be one actor. And that is when he's, this is prior to him losing his mind over anything that Timothée Chalamet does in Dune Part 2. We're going to look at Javier Bardem. We're going to kick off, the series is going to kick off with 2004's The Sea Inside. As we look at Javier Bardem, as he, well-respected Spanish actor before coming stateside with No Country for Old Men, and then seemingly ending up in just about every blockbuster movie. And
is that his first U.S. movie? No Country for Old Men?
I'm pretty sure that's his first.
Man, what an entrance!
Yeah, and then it just typecast him for a while. Now he's having to play all these villains in different movies.
Dang.
Anyway, until then. Yeah. Till then, thank y'all for listening. We'll see you next episode.